The Surgeon General of the United States under Trump, Jerome, he's insane. He mentions treat overdose like EpiPen, CPR, and he mentions diabetes and hypertension. That's rescue breathing. And then he mentions the two manufacturers which mention no rescue breathing. Then he mentions the FDA, which makes no mention of rescue breathing. Yeah, he mentions the police, and many police are given chest compressions. So they're murdering anyone that suffers any of the hundreds of causes of breathing emergency. He's an anesthesiologist who overdoses you on all kinds of different medications, and the only thing keeping you alive is ventilations. So you tell people CPR, they immediately think chest compressions, don't they?
Surgeon General says Americans should be as prepared to handle an opioids overdose as they would be to administer CPR. Today, the Surgeon General is issuing an advisory urging more Americans to carry the medication naloxone. It's also called Narcan, and it's the drug first responders use to reverse an opioid overdose. I spoke to the U.S. Surgeon General, Vice Admiral Jerome, about why ordinary Americans should be prepared to prevent someone from dying from opioids.
Over half of the overdoses that are occurring in homes, and so we want everyone to be armed to respond. We should think of it like an EpiPen or like doing CPR on someone.
Is there any kind of risk in having everyday Americans armed with naloxone? I mean, is it difficult to administer? Are there any risks of administering it incorrectly? Do people need training?
One of the things that we're doing is working with pharmacies, working with providers, working with the American Medical Association and the nursing associations to increase training on how to administer naloxone in homes. But overall, and I'm an anesthesiologist who's administered naloxone many times myself, it is easy to use, and 49 out of 50 states have standing orders for people to be able to access and use naloxone in the home setting because it is a safe drug where the benefits definitely outweigh the risk, particularly in the midst of an epidemic.
What about paying for it? I mean, this is a medication that costs around $40 a dose, I think. The company has doubled the price in recent years, one of the primary manufacturers. Some devices that you use to administer naloxone cost as much as $600. And I mean, there is no limit potentially on what individual pharmaceutical companies can charge, right?
I've spoken to the president about this personally, and both he and I are determined that the cost of naloxone will not be a barrier to folks being able to have access to it.
How do you ensure that?
Well, there are many different ways. Number one, the president has asked for and Congress has approved $6 billion in funding to respond to the opioid epidemic, more than has ever been approved in history. There's $50 million in funding that has been allocated specifically for naloxone. Number two, we're working with insurers. 95% of people who have insurance coverage, including Medicare, Medicaid, and TRICARE and the VA, are actually able to get naloxone at little or no copay, and we're working with them to make that copay as small as possible. And then finally, work with Adapt Pharmaceuticals and Kaleo, the two makers of at-home naloxone, to make it easier for individuals to access naloxone at low or no cost.
What's their incentive to keeping the price low? Will they just do it because you tell them it's the right thing to do?
Well, I hope that that's part of it. I know that these companies, I've met with the presidents and they want to do the right thing, but also strictly from an economic point of view, unfortunately, there are so many people out there that need naloxone that they are going to make their money one way or the other. And I think they want to do the right thing. They just want to do it in a way that helps them sustain their bottom line. And they can do that. We can cut the price significantly and still make money for them and save lives. And that's what we're trying to do.
Is it possible to incentivize other companies to create generics of naloxone so that there is low-cost competition?
Again, we're looking at all possibilities, but right now we have two really good FDA-approved products, and we're focused on making them available at low or no cost to as many people as possible. And I think from the federal side, from the insurer side, and from the pharmaceutical company side, we've got some great potential to do that in short order.
You described this measure making naloxone more readily available as a tourniquet, as a life-saving measure. You acknowledge that the key, though, is figuring out what to do with that person after this emergency crisis. Like, yes, you can administer this and they can live another day, but how do you make sure that person doesn't overdose 24 hours later?
Well, folks want to say, unfortunately, in far too many cases, that the individual has failed. But when a person is coming in for multiple overdoses, I see that as a system failure. We know addiction is a chronic disease, much like diabetes or hypertension, and we need to treat it the same way. So I'm focused as Surgeon General on making sure everyone sees addiction not as a moral failing, but as a chronic disease, and that we have good evidence-based treatment, including medication-assisted treatment, available for individuals with a warm handoff right from the overdose. We can't have someone overdose and then send them out onto the streets at 2 a.m. because they're going to run right back into the hands of the local drug dealer.
Well, explain that moment, the warm handoff moment.
That warm handoff means you come in at 3 a.m. in the morning, having been resuscitated from an overdose, and we have either an immediate access to treatment available for you, or what's working well in many places, including Rhode Island, where I just visited, is a peer recovery coach, someone who has...
Everybody overdoses. There's poisoning. All kinds of children get poisoned. All children have respiratory emergencies. And you don't be giving no children no CPR. Jeepers. Mass murder. EMS gives oxygen. Before naloxone was ever invented, it's oxygen only. A lot of doctors don't even use naloxone, just rescue breathing. And I got David Renwick. He's the manufacturer of naloxone general manager, on tape admitting that the government makes them put the wrong instructions in, which is killing yous all. God. Cardiac arrest is a very rare event compared to respiratory emergencies. And when you look in the news, it's CPR, CPR, CPR. Well, the signs of cardiac arrest are totally different than a respiratory emergency. It's a respiratory emergency. You give them air ASAP. Won't be pounding on a beating heart. That's murder. Plain and simple, and a child knows it. Man's insane. And he's in the military. Every soldier has their first aid, knows it's rescue breathing. Anyway, you're all being mass murdered on purpose by your government.